one of the studios that you describe having just a really tumultuous time is RKO. That was Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes.
Can you describe just the mess of a tenure that he had there?
He was probably the worst studio czar in Hollywood history. Uh, he had many emotional and physical and medical issues. He interfered with the making of films. He would stop films and ask them to reshoot and re-edit. He was an interfering mogul. However, even so, there were some very good films made at RKO under his tenure. But under his tenure, RKO ultimately, he sold out, but he did so much damage that RKO shuttered. Can you imagine the effect on the industry of one of the major studios shutting down altogether, which it did in 1957? No more RKO. So because of, in large part because of Hughes' colossal mismanagement. So the fact that a major studio shut down was a signal that this was the beginning of the end of the studio era.
Now,
And what we live in now is post-studio era. There are no
do you think
studios anymore as in the old days.
do you think RKO was salvageable if Hughes had run it better? Because there was definitely, like, in the tea leaves that the studio was already starting to struggle.
It was struggling a lot, but they made good films. They made more good film noir than any other studio, and he didn't interfere with a lot of those films. Part of him knew, I think, when he saw a really good director or film, he knew to back off. He chose his victims. He chose the vulnerable ones, the way bullies do. I loved RKO film noir. I like to think it could have survived with better management.
Huh.
No other studio collapsed except for Republic.
Yeah, except for
Sort
Republic. Yeah.
One step up from
I
Poverty
want to
Road.
I want to ask you about Republic in a second, but I want to go back to one thing with RKO, connecting it to the kind of Red Scare going through the industry at the time. RKO gets bought out at one point, not by communists, but by people with affiliations to the mob and the mafia, correct?
Yes, yes, correct.
Can you explain how that, set the whole industry off?
Well, it was clear that the mob could not run a major studio, and so even Howard Hughes saw that. So he bought back RKO from the mob that he had sold it to. So Hollywood had to get rid of offensive elements. They certainly wanted to weed out communists, and Howard Hughes was a virulent anti-red. He saw red menace everywhere. You practically had to sign a loyalty oath to work at his studio. And he tested people, directors, by giving them a project called I Married a Communist, or sometimes when it was released, The Woman on Pier 13, and it was out and out a screed against the Reds. Watch out, they're coming over to take us over. Hysterical anti-communists. And the directors who refused the assignment were consigned to oblivion by Howard Hughes because he thought they were politically suspect. So he was a political tyrant, but he was a genius in money. RKO failed, but he sold out at the end and he made money.
Yeah. Do you think when someone like Hughes blacklists somebody like that because they don't accept his project, did he have the same kind of uh say power that, like, Louis Mayer had over at MGM?
In essence, yes, the studio system was set up so that the man, and it was always a man, the man at the top had supreme authority over his realm. They were tyrants and dictators of their little kingdoms. They ran the factories. They were factories. They were filmmaking factories. And they were run by these very tough, strong-minded men, all of whom, with the possible exception of Hughes, really loved movies.
Mm.
They loved their field. They had a feel for movies. They loved the product they were selling. Nowadays, studios are run by businessmen. It was just about the bottom line. It wasn't that way in the studio era, but they had absolute power. And they knuckled under to the House on Un-American Activities Committee, who was investigating communist infiltration in Hollywood. They knuckled under when they instituted the blacklist, which is scary.
Mm.
Could it happen again? Of course it could. You'd be blacklisted for something else, not being a communist, but for something else.
Sure.
It in a way, it's happening now in a different way. The mentality of the blacklist, of excluding those with inconvenient or unpopular opinions, isn't that pernicious? It's not an awful way to live.
It sounds just like rewording cancel culture in a lot of ways.
Yes,
If
exactly. Exactly.
we've had,
Rewording it, but cancel culture is very much in the same
yeah,
mental syndrome. You cancel that which you do not agree with.